Let's talk about Indian in the Cupboard by Lynne Reid Banks. This is the first book in the Indian series. I think it's 5 books about a magical cupboard or key held by a little boy called Omri, who lives in 1980s, late 1970s London. And the particular point being that he uses it to bring a plastic Indian toy to life, that is to say Native American. And you can see on the cover. You can get the first 3 books in a nice bind up, which we're using. We're reading Return to the Indian at the moment with the kids. This was secondhand from Kitchener Public Library, which says Canada abandoned this. Blame Canada. Yeah, I enjoyed this a lot. This was a fun read. I enjoyed it on my own cognizance, and the kids enjoyed it. It's certainly, there's time capsule elements to it, being 1982 or so. I think was the first one was published. Partly, I suppose, something not. This is a value neutral thing. But obviously it's called The Indian in the Cupboard. It's a phrase where the shift to Native American hasn't happened yet. It's also, there are things that feel very Britain in terms of TV presentation and nostalgia presentation from the 70s and 80s. It's kind of, at some level, dealing with that issue of British appropriation of American culture and absorbing this other new colonial superpower culture. It's really nice. It's basically quite simple. They can make these little men come alive, but that obviously comes with attendant risks and problems. And Omri and his friend Patrick have to work their way through those problems. Little Bull, who is the Indian, who is the main character along with Omri, more than Patrick. It is mostly about Little Bull and Omri. Little Bull is a difficult, proud Iroquois warrior. There is some interesting stuff in terms of what I say about the kind of the language used. This is pretty clear about the way there's a pretty serious exploration of the ways in which the Native Americans were different to the European settlers who came to live there, and who they warred with and who they made peace with. Obviously, the Iroquois and the Five Nations and others sometimes had pretty good relationships with the British. But also how similar and how universally human they are. It's in that sense, it's a universalist and in that specific sense humanist book. Little Bull and Omri are both really quite well realised characters. Omri is a pretty normal, I guess, 11, 12-year-old. In a sense, he's not super exciting, there's nothing extra about him. But there is a character arc and a moral journey he goes on. And the same for Little Bull. And the other characters that you meet most regularly, Omri's family, they're nice. Patrick is effective. Boone and Tommy are both effective characters. It's it's well realised. It's pleasant. It has a plot that works. It has character arcs that work for the main characters, for Omri, Little Bull, Patrick, Boone. Stuff happens. There's always something new in the new chapter. There are occasionally, because the point of view is quite carefully limited to Omri, there's occasionally slightly less, what I would say, slightly less effective storytelling moments. Just occasionally, where you're relying perhaps too much on one point of view and you'd like to go to a different camera angle. That said, it mostly flows pretty well. The pace is good, like I've already said. There's not much more to say. It is a good, I'd say it's middle grade, verging on YA. It's not one. I recently talked about Harp Hall of Pern, which is now marketed as middle grade, but the 3rd book has a whopping sex scene in it, pretty full on by the standards of certainly middle grade, but even YA. It's clear that in the 70s, and this is what was the case, it was written as YA. It's been graduated to middle grade based on changing mores. Here, this is really middle grade in most respects, but it feels like in 1982, you could just see it on the cusp there. It's not as far as Dragon Drums, but it has basically it's particularly to do with mild cursing, which is you just don't find in middle grade books. But yes, I enjoyed it. If you like light, gentle fantasy, you'll like it. If you want something to read with your kids, and my kids are 6 and younger, so we're reading middle grade to them. But you can read them to an older audience too. If you want something to read with your kids, I think it's a good call too. We're enjoying the second book so far as well. If you've read it, tell me what you think. I think there's a TV series as well, so if you have views on that, share them in the comments, and I'll see you next time.